gonna be a grandfather! Charlie's pregnant!
Welcome to the Third Wind channel and the review for iCreate a New Ecosystem, the penultimate episode of Season 3. This episode explored Millicent's unique family situation and things slowly got more and more out of control. Let's do a little overview of what went down. The episode starts with Carly and Freddie preparing a family dinner for Millicent and Gwen, Millicent's mother. Gwen will be arriving soon, but in the meantime we have some dialogue about how Freddie and Gwen parent Millicent. As we know, Millicent lives with Freddie, but once a year Gwen comes in for a custody check-in, or as they explain in the episode, she comes in and oversees the ecosystem to make sure Millicent is in good hands. Millicent doesn't really want to live with Gwen, or can't really, but not because she doesn't love her, but because Gwen lives mostly on a boat, being a marine biologist, and so it doesn't really make sense for a teenager to live her formative years on a boat, obviously. Carly and Freddie are making one of Gwen's signature recipes and making a few changes as a metaphor to the changing dynamic at home, adding Carly's touch to it, pineapple in an enchilada. Classic Carly. The purpose of this meeting between the four of them is for Carly and Freddie to reveal their relationship to Gwen, but when Gwen arrives soon after, she states to Carly that she wants to catch up with her later because she wants to spend time with her family now, as she's had rough travels. Oh snap. Carly lightly protests saying she'd like to stay, but when Gwen finds out her recipe has changed, Freddie practically pushes Carly out the door, saying he's not ready for this. After Gwen and Millicent have probably gone off to spend some time together, Carly comes back clearly unhappy about, in her words, being his quote-unquote shameful little secret. Freddie explains to Carly how important this ecosystem check is, and the stakes are high. If Gwen is unhappy, she will take Millicent with her, so he proposes delaying the reveal, but Carly is adamant on revealing their friendship. Now, hopping over to Spencer's apartment, Lubert and Marissa come to Spencer for advice, or a request, or several reasons really. Lubert wants to create a Noah's Ark for insects, and Marissa is opposed. Naturally, who would want a bunch of insects at home? But this trio sets up for comedic gold. We'll come back to them soon. Carly has been mustering up ideas on how to reveal the truth to Gwen, in a non-ecosystem disruptive way of course, and Harper helps design this kangaroo bit which delivers bad news. Not a great idea. Freddie is ready to find a middle ground and gives Carly a bunch of books on being a mother, also not a great idea. Then Harper brings up an idea she's wanted to be a part of for a long time, a fafuda, or in actual words, a family fun day, which the gang agree is a good setting for a reveal. And then enters Paul, who is desperate for something to do socially and kind of forces his way into this event, with the exception that he talks positively about Carly to Gwen. Now, we're almost done setting up this episode, and this is where the paths will cross, and what makes this episode so fun. Our whole cast is going to link up. Spencer goes to the studio to visit his puppets, more on that later, but he finds the maternity books. And after his brain calculates for a while, he makes the realistic realization that Carly is pregnant and goes wild, running all the way until he reaches the Benson's door across the hall and tells Marissa and Lubert, who also then go crazy running around. The whole scene is hilarious, I loved it. The three of them then convene in the newly formed Grandparents Club, which is very secret, but Marissa and Lubert's prior arguments quickly take over the meeting with their insect dispute showing its true colors. They were arguing whether they're going to move into her or his place. Spencer dismisses it and offers to move them both into his apartment, which they obviously refuse. We then move into the grand culmination for the episode, the fafuda, or also fafupa, due to a typo on Harper's t-shirts. Freddie and Carly plan to get Gwen a little tipsy, but when she arrives and reveals she's going sober this month, this is the first misstep of many to come in this event. Paul then arrives and in conversation with Gwen reveals that Freddie is now unemployed, which is a big concern for the ecosystem. Freddie explains that he sold his company and is now writing music and producing with iCarly. Gwen is concerned not only about the unemployment but also their level of trust, saying this ecosystem is based on trust. She needs a minute to gather her thoughts and Paul joins her. He's clearly hitting on her and not taking a hint. Carly and Freddie see the disaster that's going on, and when Gwen steps back in, we can see Harper behaving like an alcoholic, Marissa and Lubert fighting, Paul perving, Freddie cutting up his t-shirt, and when things couldn't get any worse or more chaotic, Spencer enters freaking out about Carly being pregnant. Freddie is overjoyed, but Carly dismisses it quickly. She is not pregnant. Gwen, of course, not knowing about them being together, is shocked, and this is the final straw. With unemployment, a new relationship, and a clearly chaotic environment, she concludes that this ecosystem is evaluated and she'll be taking Millicent with her when she leaves, asking Carly and Freddie if they really thought t-shirts, park wine, and this guy would be enough to convince her. Amongst lots of fighting going on, Carly spots Millicent alone looking sad in the foam, and the two have a heart-to-heart where Millicent reveals that she wants to stay and is upset that Gwen won't ask her what she wants. When Gwen and Freddie overhear their conversation, Gwen soon realizes that this is the right place for Millicent, and we have a heartwarming hug with the entire cast of iCarly, pretty much just hugging it out all in one place. What a moment. Lubert also agrees to move in with Marissa, a big piece of info there, and also reveals that his tarantulas got out, and everyone panics. In our final scene, we find out that Spencer has taken on the insect Noah's Ark job, and Carly is horrified with all the insects in the apartment, and just shows how alike she is with her brother. It seems like the compromise between Lubert and Marissa was that he was moving in with her and he gets to do his bug project. That's what went down in this episode, briefly, but we have a lot of observations and analysis and Easter eggs to note. But before I even get into that, let's do some character spotlights to break down what we learned about each of our characters in this episode, starting with Carly. After this episode, Carly has to some extent crossed the biggest hurdles into being in a good relationship with Freddie, as her relationship with Millicent looks better now. There were some allusions to Carly being pregnant, and I'd say it's pretty much confirmed now that Carly and Freddie have slept together, which should have been obvious at this point as the relationship has now spanned over many months. So we have hints about them having a baby, moving in together, and naturally also a marriage. What might we see next episode? We'll see. But another thing I'd like to bring up about Carly is how she is presented as fairly dumb in the revival, which is especially notable since in the original she was a straight A student. What changed? Speaking of Carly, let's do Freddie next. Freddie nearly lost custody of his daughter in this episode, and he had to balance relationships with 3 different women in his life, but in the end it all worked out. We also now have clarity on the Kevin app. It's sold. Freddie now uses his time on writing music and helping produce iCarly. Maybe Freddie's less ambitious because now he's with his dream woman. Otherwise, it was beautiful to see how excited he was at the idea of Carly being pregnant, and for that matter, everyone around them too. Next up, Spencer. Spencer is increasingly becoming more and more self-aware. He knows he's a goofball, he knows he's closer to being a grandparent than a kid, he knows his artist label can be advantageous, and he knows that he's more of a father to Carly than her dad ever was. He also sees Millicent as a niece, and he is all in. It's great to see him so committed to who he is and his environment. Moving on, let's talk about Millicent. I initially thought this episode was going to be more focused on Millicent, but if anything, it's more focused on Carly. Millicent said herself that she's more of a passenger in all of this, and she wants to be taken into consideration too. Even if she doesn't show it, she loves this ecosystem and the group of people around her. We learned that Millicent can speak Spanish, and she does off and on with Gwen, and also her favorite foods are her mom's enchiladas and sushi. Let's talk about our next character, which is Harper. Harper's position in the show continues to be awkward, but perhaps a little less so after this episode. She said herself she's a bit like an auntie of the group and has a close relationship to Millicent. Her wealthy background is brought up again, and it seems like she was quite lonely growing up. So much so that she addresses this childhood trauma with a therapist regularly. The only recurring character not in this episode is Tinsley, and I don't know about you guys, but for me, that immediately adds some levity in this episode. Harper continues to be the biggest question mark for me in this show going forward. Our next character is Marissa. Marissa and Lubert have become such a great couple, and them moving in together right next door to Spencer should be fun. One big difference between Marissa in this season from the last is the amount of time she spends with Millicent, a lot less now, so I was surprised that Marissa didn't support Millicent in this episode. Next, main man, no, it's Lubert. But Lubert is super underrated to me. I think he's been perfect for this revival. He is so funny and played perfectly. He's one of the best examples of a character that transitioned well from the original to the revival. I also love how he reacted to Carly being pregnant potentially. He was ready to be a grandfather, very heartwarming. We got 2 characters to go, and let's start with Paul. One of the best things about season 3 is this expanded cast, and Paul is a lot of fun. His character fits well into this universe, and he fills the gap in the missing iCarly webshow team well. Now, in this episode, he's going through some sort of midlife crisis, and he really adds to the chaos of the episode. And finally, let's talk about one of the main focuses of this episode, Gwen. I've been reading some comments, and it seems like the biggest fan complaint about the episode is Gwen's sudden 180, as well as the change in nature from her first appearance. I personally wasn't as bothered by her change in nature, which can be explained by her stressful travel, but the 180 was quite abrupt. Even that makes sense to a degree, just a little fast, but the thing that bothered me the most was her relationship with Carly. They appear as best of friends in the first season, and here they barely acknowledge each other. Last thing on Gwen, I was hoping we'd get an explanation as to why her relationship with Freddie didn't work out, but unluckily we'll have to wait to find out. However, we did get the opposite. One of the things that originally brought them together was their mutual love of science. Lots of characters in this episode, but we also have a good amount of Easter eggs. Let's go through them. Spencer mentions that Marissa and him have a knock entrance relationship, which we saw develop in the years of the original show, and now that has developed into a friendship for sure. Lupert was different in the original. Spencer would always meet him at the door, whereas Marissa would just walk in at times. Second Easter egg, Spencer's puppets make a return, or the marionette dolls more correctly. We first saw them in the pilot of the revival, and they add the supernatural elements of Spencer's character. Maybe Spencer is a wizard. Next, we also see a clear shot of the hallway between the Shays and the Bensons, which is definitely quite different than it was in the original, which we already knew, but it was interesting to see it shown like this. This next one isn't really an Easter egg, but we saw another Walmart Plus sponsorship, the last one we saw in I Go Public. The 2 episodes were shot within a few weeks of each other, so it makes sense. Here's another Easter egg you didn't think of. Freddie mentions writing music. Why is that familiar? Well, in the original, he and Gibby started a band to attract girls. That's a fun throwback. Another Easter egg is Spencer mentioning inviting both Carly's dad and avoiding inviting Granddad. We last saw Granddad appear in season 2, and Carly's dad was last mentioned in the pilot of the revival. Last Easter egg, and a clever one, Carly mentions to Millicent that she does not know anything about being a mother, but if there's one thing she knows is that if you feel strongly about something, you gotta speak up for yourself. I think this is a throwback to the original's pilot when Carly stood up for herself, Sam, and the other kids at the school by starting iCarly. Some great Easter eggs from this episode. Now let's move into the final segment of the video, final takeaways and analysis, and we have quite a bit to discuss. First up, when Millicent lists the people that are important to her in Seattle, there's no mention of any people her age. Does Millicent have any friends at school? If so, they are not important enough to be a reason not to move away from Seattle. Next, I want to bring up a switcheroo in this episode. In I Go Public, it's Carly that doesn't want to go public with the relationship, and although it's done under different circumstances, in this episode it was Freddie that was passive about being transparent about them being a couple. Thought that was an interesting dynamic, but also, how come Gwen doesn't already know about the relationship? I mean, 50,000 people saw their reveal stream, but somehow Gwen is completely out of the loop. A little odd. Moving on, is it just me that thinks Carly has been dumbed down a little bit too much? I mean, she's funny and I love her likeness to Spencer, but the airheadedness has been dialed into like an 8, and in the original it was like a 4 if not lower. The next one I think is critical. It's official now that Lupert will be moving in across the hall, and I just don't see Freddie and Millicent living in harmony in that apartment together anymore. So where might they move to? Well, I feel it's either with Spencer or to Carly's, or with Carly into Spencer's, because if they move in with Carly, then where will Harper go off to? A lot of questions. We'll see soon enough how that will all go, but I like the idea of moving into Spencer's, and maybe they can reintroduce Carly's big room from the original. Next, I quickly wanted to mention how I think it's super appropriate and fun to see how open Spencer is to the idea of pretty much being Carly's father. Such a special bond they have. The last point for today that I wanted to mention is the scene in the film where the whole cast is hugging. Wasn't that nice to see? That's like the second generation of iCarly all in one frame. Moments like this really put things into perspective. I loved it. And that will be all for this review. Let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments below, and a huge thank you to the Third Win superfans, Rose, Corey, Sarah, and Jaden. That's all, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.